There was a serious attempt to put 1.5 front and center. The language that has just come out in the last few hours has softened that, has fallen back on previously agreed language. But there is still a call to bring back new targets, to do so next year, and to do so with the goal, ideally, of trying to limit it to 1.5 degrees, but without that strict mandate that it has to be aligned. So it's a good, ultimately, if this is where we land, it's a good outcome, but not as ambitious as many would have hoped.
What have been some of the main obstructions in negotiations?
A number of countries don't want to be forced to bring back new targets. They feel like they're doing what they can, especially some of the emerging economies that still have a lot to go on their development pathway. But then you also have wealthy, industrialized countries like Australia that also doesn't want to put forward a strong 2030 target. So you have a mix of countries that are dragging back and acting as a handbrake on ambition, which is a real pity because, after all, COP26 is all about what we do in the decisive decade, as President Biden says. The US-China deal also focuses on the here and now, what we do in the 2020s. But we need to see that actually reflected in the decision text at the end of the Glasgow Pact. And we'll see in the next few hours if that's where we land.
And what have the UN Secretary-General and the COP26 President had to say as the summit comes to a close?
There's been a frustration from the UN Secretary-General. He wanted to see more put on the table. Having said that, though, there's some things that happen here at COP26 I've never seen before. And I've been coming for around 15 years to these types of conferences. And that's for the first time ever, fossil fuels are addressed head on. We're seeing language that actually calls for the phase out of coal, for the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies, for the phase out of methane, which is 70 to 90% of natural gas is methane. It often leaks when we mine it. You're seeing fossil fuels squarely put as part of the problem, not as a transition to getting to the solution. The solution is clear. It's renewables, it's electric vehicles, it's batteries. There's been a lot around that. But now, for the first time ever, we're actually addressing the problem.
So do you think more can be achieved? The summit comes to an end at 6 p.m. GMT, the wee hours of the morning here. What more can be negotiated?
There's still going to be a vanguard push from some countries for more ambitious language, actually locking in 1.5 degrees, which is what we need. The Pacific have been the most outspoken. They say we need 1.5 to stay alive, and that's what many want to see reflected in clear and strict language in the text. So there'll be a push in the final couple of hours to get there. And in addition, there'll also be interest in what the finance package looks like, paying developing countries to do more. That's the glue that brings it all together. But when it comes to fossil fuels, we're ultimately keen to see that language strengthened.
A small group of countries announced an alliance to phase out oil and gas production. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, led by Denmark and Costa Rica, is unique. Basically, countries joined by saying that they will not open up any new oil and gas leases. So some countries like New Zealand in our corner of the world have signed up, and it's great because we can't afford to have any more gas or oil. Australia has over 100 new coal and gas projects in the works. If it releases that on the world, that's about 3 times its national emissions. It's about 200 coal-fired power stations. It's too much. We can't survive if we keep growing the problem. And so alliances like the oil and gas one, and last week against coal power, are really helping to push the envelope towards a serious solution.
And what about the US and China, two of the world's biggest emitters? What have they pledged at this summit?
This was a surprise that the US and China dropped the deal that they'd been stitching up all year in just 2 days ago in a surprise press conference. You can't underestimate the impact. These are the 2 largest emitters, the 2 largest economies that have come a meeting of minds to say, let's do as much as we can in the 2020s. And let's also actually tackle the greenhouse gases that get you more bang for your buck, and that's like methane emissions. And so they'll be working together on how to do that. It's great because on top of that, you had India, the 3rd largest emitter, come forward and say, we want 50% of our energy now to come from renewables. So you're seeing big emitters take serious steps, and that's what we're going to need going forward if we're going to solve climate change.
Well, there was concern Australia was going to come under significant criticism from the international community for its climate record and commitments. Has that eventuated? What's your assessment?
Look, Australia has been a handbrake, unfortunately, on climate ambition. It's a wealthy country, an industrialized country. It could and should be doing more. In fact, the Prime Minister came here and said, we're gonna meet and beat our target. We can do much better. In fact, we're going to beat it by 10 percentage points, but we're not going to commit to it. And that's unfortunate. You can't bank on a projection. You can only bank on what countries are going to be held accountable to. That's how we bend the curve to 1.5 degrees. Australia also seems to be promoting fossil fuels. It's done so in the pavilion that it hired by giving Santos the floor to showcase its fossil fuel technology, and that hasn't gone down well. Unfortunately, Australia has not been seen as a constructive player at these negotiations, but a fossil fuel promoter and a handbrake on ambition.
Finally, Richie, the end of the summit does not mean the end of talks. What happens now to ensure countries continue the discussion to meet their targets?
There'll be another COP at the end of next year. It'll be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. It's going to be a big focus on, again, bringing back updated targets. So there will be a request for countries specifically like Australia that haven't updated their 2030 targets to bring updated commitments to the table next year in Egypt. There'll also be called for more financing so that developing countries can move away from fossil fuels. We've seen some deals. South Africa, for example, Africa's largest coal producer and user, is now stitched up a deal with the US and the UK to phase out its coal. So we're going to see more of these deals happen, especially with an African COP and with an opportunity to actually help countries both develop and do so in a clean and green way.
Well, Richie, thanks for wrapping that up for us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.